A glass slipper isn't magic. It's proof you were at the crime scene. The only question is, why did you want to be found? In fairy tales, Cinderella loses her shoe by accident. In reality, nothing is lost by accident, especially when you've spent 3 months engineering the perfect alibi in front of 300 witnesses. My name is Ella, not Cinderella. That's the nickname my stepmother gave me as a joke when I scrubbed the fireplace. But nicknames stick, especially when you decide to use them. People think I was a victim, poor orphan who got lucky with a prince. Pretty story, convenient story, the kind of story everyone wants to repeat because it confirms their belief in justice. But justice doesn't arrive on its own. Justice is what you build with your own hands, even if those hands are stained with ash or blood. My father died when I was 14. Official version, heart failure. Real version, my stepmother got tired of waiting for her inheritance. I watched her pour something into his evening brandy, watched him clutch his chest, watched her call the doctor an hour later when it was already too late. I couldn't prove it. She had everything: documents, witnesses, a doctor who signed the necessary conclusion for generous compensation. All I had was suspicion and hatred that I learned to hide behind a polite smile. 6 years I lived in that house as a servant, cooked, cleaned, scrubbed. My stepmother and her daughters, Anastasia and Drizella, treated me like furniture, useful, invisible. That was their mistake. Servants go unnoticed, which means servants see everything. I knew Anastasia was forging receipts from the shops and pocketing the difference. I wrote down the dates of every forgery in a small notebook I kept under a floorboard. I knew Drizella was sleeping with a married merchant and blackmailing him for silence. I read their letters when I cleaned her room. I knew my stepmother was borrowing money from a loan shark at interest rates she'd never be able to repay. I listened to her late-night conversations with creditors through the door. I collected information for 6 years, recorded dates, amounts, names, kept accounts like a bookkeeper tracking expenses. Every sin of theirs, a line in my ledger. Every mistake, potential leverage. But information without a plan is just paper. I needed a trigger, an event that would let me change everything without raising suspicion. The announcement of the royal ball came on a Wednesday. The prince was looking for a bride. All unmarried women of the kingdom were required to attend. I understood. This was my window. Not to get married, but to create a legend that would eclipse any suspicion. Fairy godmother is a pretty name for a woman who teaches girls to solve problems quietly. Her real name was Madame Tremont. She'd been my mother's companion before my mother died of fever when I was 7. Elderly, elegant, with the manners of an aristocrat and the morals of an alley cat. After my mother's death, she moved to the capital, but she came to visit once every 3 months under the pretense of courtesy. Really, she was checking if I was alive and if I was ready to act. When I told her about the ball, she didn't ask why. She just nodded and said, "Finally, I've been waiting for you to ripen." She pulled a small case from her bag. Inside, 3 vials. The first one is fast. 3 drops in wine. Works within an hour. Heart attack. Doctors love simple diagnoses. She set down the second vial. This one's slow. 1 drop per day for a week. Looks like illness, fever, weakness, organ failure. No one will suspect. The third vial was the smallest. This one's insurance, in case someone starts asking questions. 1 swallow and they forget the last 24 hours. Useful if a witness saw something they shouldn't have. I took the case, cold wood in my palm. Will it be enough? If you're smart about it, yes. The key is timing. Don't rush. 3 deaths in a month is suspicious. 3 deaths in a year is statistics. I nodded, but I only had until the end of ball season. After that, the prince would choose a bride, and my chance would disappear. Madame Tremont looked at me for a long time, appraising. "You look like your mother. She knew how to wait too, but she didn't know how to protect herself. I don't want you to repeat her mistake. I won't. Good. Then one last piece of advice. When it's over, burn the notebook. Memory is evidence, and evidence needs to be destroyed. She left that same night. I never saw her again. 3 months later, rumors reached me that Madame Tremont had died of old age at her estate, quietly, without witnesses. I don't know if it was true or if she staged her own death, but I know this. She was smart enough to disappear before anyone could connect her to me. The carriage wasn't made from a pumpkin. It was rented for 20 coins from a merchant who didn't ask unnecessary questions. The dress was sewn by a seamstress who worked for Madame Tremont and was paid generously for her silence. The shoes I chose myself, glass, fragile, one of a kind, custom made by a master glassblower, recognizable, unique. I arrived at the ball at 8 in the evening. My stepmother and stepsisters were already there, in their ridiculous dresses, wearing forced smiles, desperately trying to catch the prince's attention. They didn't recognize me. It was almost insulting. 6 years under the same roof, and they couldn't identify my face when it was clean, my hair styled, my dress worth more than they earned in a year. Prince Christopher noticed me first. Tall, broad-shouldered, sharp eyes. The manners of a man who'd gotten everything he wanted his entire life. But there was something else in his eyes. Boredom. Deep, corrosive boredom of someone for whom everything was too predictable. He approached, asked me to dance. I accepted. We danced for 2 hours. He talked about the kingdom, about duty. I listened, asked questions, not the ones all the other girls asked. If you weren't a prince, what would you be? He didn't answer right away. Then he said, an investigator. I like figuring people out, understanding why they do what they do. I smiled. That's a useful skill for a king. Or a dangerous one. Sometimes it's better not to know the truth. 300 people saw us together. 300 witnesses who would later tell the royal chroniclers, yes, she was there, with the prince. All night, they never left each other's side. At 10 in the evening, I excused myself, said I needed to use the powder room. He released me with a slight bow. I found my stepmother in a side hall. She was drinking wine, watching Drizella clumsily try to flirt with some count. I approached from behind, changing my walk and voice. Madame, the prince asked me to tell you that an important guest is waiting for you in the East Wing. It concerns your debt. Greed and fear, two emotions that shut down caution. She went pale, quickly set down her glass and left, alone, into an empty corridor where there were no servants or guards. I caught up with her by the fountain in the garden, held out a glass of wine. Madame, are you unwell? Drink this. She grabbed the glass without looking at me, drank it in one gulp. 3 drops from the first vial. Fast, clean. I left through the service entrance, returned to the hall, fixed my hair, found the prince, danced for another hour. They found my stepmother in the morning. The doctor said heart, stress, age, wine in her blood, but that was normal for a ball. No one argued. I didn't rush. Haste leaves traces. I dealt with Anastasia 2 months after the ball. The prince had already sent messengers with the slipper. He needed time for the search to look romantic. Technically, I'd inherited my father's estate, but the documents were being contested. Anastasia died from an accident. She fell down the stairs at night, tripping on her own dress. 1 drop of the second vial every evening for a week beforehand. Dizziness, weakness, loss of balance. The doctor confirmed. She'd been complaining about her health for some time. Drizella, another month later. Food poisoning from spoiled meat. Her lover, the merchant, was under investigation for smuggling. When he was arrested, Drizella fell into despair. The doctor recorded suicide by poison. I didn't correct him. By that time, the prince had found me. I was the last person to try on the slipper. It fit perfectly because I'd had it made for my foot. He knelt, offered his hand and heart in front of a crowd of courtiers. I accepted. Of course, I accepted. The wedding was 3 months later. Grand, public. I stood in a white dress and smiled. The perfect bride, the perfect fairy tale everyone wanted to hear. But on the first wedding night, when the music died and the guests departed, Christopher sat on the edge of the bed and looked at me. Not with love, with curiosity. "Ella," he said calmly, "I need to tell you something." I froze but kept my face composed. Before I became heir to the throne, I spent 2 years training with the royal investigator. It was my father's whim. I studied cases, learned to see patterns. I studied the cases of your family: stepmother, heart attack; Anastasia, fall; Drizella, suicide. Every case closed. Legally, everything's clean. He turned. But 3 deaths in one family over 4 months, that's a statistical anomaly, and I don't believe in coincidences. My heart was pounding, but I kept my breathing even. And then I remembered something. That night at the ball, you disappeared from the hall for exactly 12 minutes. I timed it, not because I suspected, because I was curious where you went. Your stepmother died that same night, in the garden, where the path from the East Wing leads. I don't know if you're guilty. I have no proof. The vials, if they existed, have surely been destroyed by now. He sat across from me. But here's what I know for certain. You're too smart to leave evidence, too patient to act impulsively, and too calculating to kill without motive. His eyes burned, not with anger, with admiration. I spent 3 months surrounded by girls who wanted to marry me for the crown. You're the only one who looked at me like a person, not a throne. Because you didn't need the crown, you needed freedom and an alibi. You used me, Ella, and you know what? I like it, because I've been used my whole life, but no one has ever done it so masterfully. I said nothing, didn't deny, didn't confirm. Now you're my wife. By law, I can't interrogate you. You're protected. But here's what you need to understand. He took my hand. I'm going to watch, every day, every word, every gesture. Not because I want to catch you, but because I'm curious how long you can play the perfect wife, knowing that I know. He smiled. This is a game, Ella. You're playing the role of Cinderella. I'm playing the role of the prince. But we both know the truth, and that makes our life much more interesting than any other couple in the palace. I looked at him, and for the first time in 6 years, I felt something other than cold calculation. Not fear, not relief. Something more dangerous, recognition. He saw me, the real me, and instead of wanting to run, I wanted to stay and see who would win. 3 years have passed. I gave birth to an heir. I behave flawlessly, smile at receptions, the perfect princess. And Christopher watches. Not suspiciously, not aggressively, just attentively. The way a scientist observes an experiment. Sometimes he asks, "Do you regret anything?" I answer, "Only that I didn't meet you sooner." He laughs, but his eyes remain cold. I don't know if he loves me. I don't know if I ever loved him. But I know that every morning when I wake up and see his gaze, I don't feel fear. I feel excitement. And that scares me more than any gallows. I got what I wanted: freedom, revenge, security. But the price of this victory is life under a microscope. Life where every action can be interpreted as admission of guilt. In fairy tales, Cinderella lives happily ever after. In reality, Cinderella lives carefully ever after. Every day, every minute. But here's what I'll never tell anyone. I like it. I like waking up not knowing what question he'll ask today. I like watching him observe me during dinner, trying to catch me in a contradiction. I like being the only woman in the palace he takes seriously. For 6 years, I was invisible. Now I'm the center of someone's attention, even if that attention belongs to an investigator, even if it's a trap. But it's my trap, the one I chose. And the scariest part, I'm no longer sure who caught whom.